Don't die until you're dead. Billy Connelly. If you've ever read a self-help book, and there are many of them, one of the things they keep trying to get you to do is to encourage you to imagine yourself as an old person. You've to imagine lying on your deathbed with your family or your younger self before you, and then you've to think of some advice to give to your younger self or loved ones. The point of the exercise, I suppose, is to get you to think about your mortality, to give you a jolt, to spark some insight deep within you into what you really want to do with your life before old age robs you of your youth and vitality. Personally, I don't know if this is an exercise that works too well. I mean, self-help books, generally speaking, are fine in of themselves. But I just get the impression that if everyone who read a self-help book took the time to truly think about what it would be like to lie on their sickbed and face their imminent death, then they'd do what's required to achieve happiness. And I think there would be many more happy people in the world and far fewer people who reach the end of their life wondering what it was all for, or trying to run screaming towards the exit doors in a vain attempt to avoid the oncoming abyss. Apparently, if you stare into the abyss for long enough, the abyss stares back. So what do the sick and the dying say about life when they are staring death in the face? Well, the answer might surprise you. The biggest regrets of the dying are that they spent too much time working, that they never had the courage to be themselves, that they never let themselves be happy, and that they never made time for friends and family. I hope you're learning from these people's mistakes. But if you haven't, then give yourself a slap on the wrist and a stern talking to. You can, and you will do better. You deserve to live a rich and happy life, not one that ends with a whimper and a list of regrets weighing on your mind. So, here's the rub. You are mortal, and this means you are going to die. If it makes you feel any better, I am going to die too, and everyone you and I know is going to die. Misery loves company, I suppose. Yes, I know from one point of view all this talk of death is bleak, to say the least, but fortunately, from another point of view, it's also life-affirming, too. After all, if you know that the people you love are going to die, as well as the people you care very little for, then you can treat them all with compassion when they irritate you. If you know that death can strike you down, you can be more forgiving of your own failings and those of others. As it says in A Christmas Carol, we are fellow passengers to the grave. Which reminds me, as far as I'm concerned, it's in imagining myself at the receiving end of a visit from the ghost of Christmas yet to come which is more likely to do the trick. If the thought of staring into the pitiless eyes of the ghost of Christmas yet to come isn't terrifying enough and doesn't encourage you to turn over a new leaf, to make the most of your life, then what about visiting your lifeless body and seeing it covered in nothing but a sheet? What about overhearing people make disparaging comments about your life? And what about seeing all your possessions being sold to the ragman for a paltry sum? And then what about ending up at a graveyard only to stare down at your own grave? Well, if that doesn't put a rocket up you, nothing will. If all this is making you depressed and leaves you with the desire to jump off a bridge, then perhaps George Bailey rather than Scrooge is the man for you. Yes, George Bailey, a character who's so downtrodden by life that he goes to end it all by jumping off a bridge and is only saved by the intervention of an angel, Clarence, who shows George what the world would be like without him in it. Sadly, the truth is there are no angels out there to show you just how much you mean to your friends and family, nor how many lives your life has touched. But it's in the hundreds, if not the thousands. That's the truth. And just like George Bailey, the impact you have on the world isn't in how much money or power you have, but in your kindness and simple human decency. Of course, on those dark days when death takes someone you love, the single crumb of comfort you have in the face of the inevitable is that you bear the burden of grief, so your loved one doesn't have to. It's better that you grieve for your loved one than they are made to grieve for you. Also, your grief, like a mirror, reflects back to you the depth of love you had for the person you've lost. The deeper your grief, the deeper your love. It's the price you pay for being such a kind, caring and compassionate person. Besides, no one truly dies if they live on in the memories of those they leave behind, don't you think? Mark Twain said, "The only two certainties in life are death and taxes." Of course, you might want to add, yes, but you can always avoid paying taxes, especially if you have a good accountant. No one can avoid death. As Shakespeare added, we owe God a death. Yes, death must always have his pound of flesh. And perhaps we also know a truth without realizing it. We all must face death so that the human race doesn't have to. Without each generation being replaced by the next, perhaps the tree of humanity would not grow, would not survive. We must die to ensure the survival of our species. The answer to death, then, isn't, as we instinctively know, immortality. The folk that spend their time trying to avoid death, trying to keep one step ahead of the grim reaper's scythe are deluded at best. At worst, they're wasting valuable time that would be better spent in the company of their loved ones planting the seeds of love and kindness. I reckon a good rule of thumb is to remember what Scrooge realized when he was on his knees and begging the ghost of Christmas yet to come to spare him. A man's actions foreshadow certain ends, and if those actions be persisted in, then the outcome remains the same. But if you alter your actions, then the course of your life also changes, too. So make your actions count. And when you act, act with an open heart and with one eye on the future. Don't die until you're dead. And learn from the dying. Don't spend too much time working. Have the courage to be yourself. Make time for your friends and family. Let yourself be happy. And then when your strength fades, and your body fails you, you will face death the same way you faced life.